Hello, Dr. Dan here. For this video, I'd like to walk you through how to read a scholarly research article. So let's go ahead, and the first thing I'm going to do is just very briefly describe some different journal article types, scholarly article types, and then really focus on two of the main types of journal articles that anyways my students in the field of psychology would typically review during their degree, and this applies for many different psychology degrees at the graduate level. So first off, 6 article types that journals publish. Here's a little handout that I found, and very simply it describes original research, review article, clinical case study, clinical trial, an opinion article, and a book review as 6 different examples. For the most part, in my program, in the area of industrial organizational psychology as well as general psychology, students would be using original research. That's primarily what they will be using to support their work. So in other words, the authors actually conducted the research themselves and in turn are reporting on that research. Or perhaps a review article where it's more of a generalized article that describes the research of others, or another article. Many times what is really helpful is not necessarily a review of one article, but like it mentions over here, a meta-analysis, where the article is actually examining many different articles and looking for common ground. These can be particularly useful when students are first investigating a topic. So here's an example. One of the areas of psychology that I'm investigating is spirituality in the workplace. And I found this particular article to be very helpful. This is a meta-analysis. This is a review of many different studies. And what it basically did for me is allow me to, at the beginning of my understanding of spirituality in the workplace, understand, and the article is somewhat self-explanatory. The title, I should say here, is Spirituality and Religion in the Workplace, History, Theory, and Research. So that's fairly self-explanatory. It gives me an idea that, hey, these authors here are looking into the overall concept of spirituality and religion in the workplace. Then what I do next is I go ahead and I look at the abstract over here, and in this highlighted area I can very clearly see what the authors are doing, and essentially they're exploring underlying assumptions in history. They're looking at major theoretical developments and so on, and I can see that right here in the abstract. So there again, what that immediately tells me is that this is an overview of research and not a study that they themselves have currently done. This is important for students to know, because particularly for students that, let's say you're actually at the end of your PhD program and you are conducting a dissertation and you want to investigate 40, 50, 100 articles that examine a particular topic. Well, you want to have many different research articles where the authors conducted the research themselves, so you can actually look in depth at their findings and so on. And I'm going to show you an example of that here shortly. As we scroll through this particular article, this overview, there are some clues here to what this article is. So if you still haven't recognized that this is an overview of many different articles, well, first off, in the beginning, similar to most any studies, you'll see a literature review here. You have many different studies, but then later on, this is a really good indication that this particular article is an overview, a critique, a study of many different articles. In this case, again, a meta-analysis, where we can see by the titles of the various sections, an overview of history. Where's another example? Theoretical development, spiritual leadership theory, theory development, and so on. We can see that these are all overviews. And including here, this is a very useful table, summary of empirical studies on spirituality, religion in the workplace. So here's even a summary of many of the critical studies that these authors examined. Once again, this particular type of article is very useful to provide students and researchers an overview of a topic, and then in turn, actually, so I don't make you dizzy here, I'm going to fly down to the end, but then also what's provided here in the reference list is many different articles that you as the researcher or student may find interesting to your particular study. So let's say in this case, you're examining specifically prayer in the workplace, or maybe you're examining something to do with, let's say, leadership, which this Fry study appears to examine. So now you can in turn use these references as a starting point to investigate research that is more in depth, and then actually find the individual articles where the articles examined the research. And again, moving back here, that's called original research. That's where they actually conducted the study. So here's an example of original research. And so what we have here is Hall and Edwards actually conducted research. And what they did is, let me see where I can find it, because they actually conducted 2 studies in here. And if you look at, again, so what do? We look at the title. It's a very good hint that they actually looked at and conducted a study on their own, but if you're not sure, we go to the abstract. And then right over here, I have it highlighted for you. The present article reports the results of 2 studies. Well, there you go. So now we can clearly see it's a report of 2 studies where the authors, and we're not sure yet if it reports on 2 other studies. So is it firsthand or is it these authors? But as we read further into this article, we see that Hall and Edwards actually conducted this study themselves. So using these clues, using this evidence, we look into the article further and we see that, once again, this is original research. It's not a review article, not a case study, not any of these others, not opinion and book review, but actually original research. All right, so that is the first part of our little conversation here, and that's how to identify an article type. One thing that students should avoid doing is using too many reviews. And I granted this is just my opinion here right now, but I believe that most people would say that if you are conducting, let's say, research on your own, you want to be using primary literature. The problem with, and for that matter, if you're conducting a literature review on your own, you want to use primary research literature. If you're using, let's say, exclusively reviews of other literature, well, now you're looking at secondhand information. So what happens is you're looking at literature that has described other literature. And for those of you maybe that have played that game in the past as kids where you whisper something in someone's ear and then they go around a circle, and by the time you get to the end, the person that says the message, well, you find it's kind of funny because it's dramatically changed. The message is not what it originally started out to be. And that is very applicable in the area of examining summaries of other articles. If you do that once and twice and again, all of a sudden the message can be lost, changed, and so on. All right, now let's go into how to examine and what to look for in original research article. Now, this can change based on the class you're in. So I'm going to go through just kind of maybe a more elementary beginner way of examining a primary or an original research article. However, just to provide you a couple examples, if you're in a research methods class, well, maybe the methods section will be more important to you. Or if you're in a statistics class, maybe the results in the statistics section will be more important to you. If you're in a class like I teach where I'm trying to show students who are relatively new in their graduate work, whether it be in a master's or PhD program, when I'm explaining what to do there, well, maybe they're more interested, let's say if they're writing a literature review, they're more interested in the beginning section of the article and then later on in that discussion section. So this can vary based on the class that you're in or what your objectives are as a researcher. So let's go through this and I'll provide you some examples. All right, in the beginning of most articles, you're going to have a literature review. This information is important because it's going to provide you some of the overall information to get you a deeper understanding of the topic in general. I caution students that this information will help you as a student learning about a topic. However, be careful not to cite these sources, otherwise the article you're reading becomes a secondary source. In other words, I will not, this is by Hall and Edwards, okay? The beginning is not examining their research, but instead an example like here, Hill and Hood. So if I'm writing a literature review, I want to avoid describing the Hill and Hood study. Instead, I should be going to the Hill and Hood 1999 study, read it myself, and then cite them. And the same for this Gorsuch and Miller article. I don't necessarily want to cite them. If I do, then there's some APA rules, and I'm citing what Hall and Edwards said about the Gorsuch and Miller article, so this becomes a secondary source. And there again, I might lose some of that, some of the details or some of the precise explanations of what actually occurred in the Gorsuch and Miller article. So here again, we want to focus on the primary research, on the original research, which is done by Hall and Edwards. All right, so we scroll through this, we learn about the topic and their study, and then we start to learn about now what Hall and Edwards are actually doing. So in this case, it's a background of the initial development of the SAI, which is the measure that they used. And then we read about the purpose of the current studies, which again, for this article, they actually conduct 2 studies. And then finally, we get into some of the details. We get into the method that they used for the current study. So if you are conducting, let's say, a literature review, you want to, sure, learn about the topic in this first section. But then perhaps, let's say you're someone that uses an annotated bibliography to take notes of this particular article. Well, you probably want to make a note of what method they used. For example, you want to maybe make a note of what the population was. So in this case, undergraduates, and what instrument was used, the spirituality assessment inventory. You can pretty much do that in one sentence. You may also want to write about any other particular details that are important to this study. Now we want to look at the results and the discussion, and this becomes very important because when you're discussing, let's say for a literature review again, the original research, you definitely want to describe what the outcome of that research was. Now in this case, maybe what we don't want to look at in great detail is the statistics. All of the various numbers that you'll see here that were reported, particularly if you don't understand what some of this stuff is. So if you don't totally understand, let's say you're at the beginning of your graduate program and you don't know what exactly means to be statistically significant or not, and what the values mean, such as in this particular table, then I would caution you not to write about this information, because if you don't know what it means, if you don't know what alpha levels are like this and so on, then if you don't know what you're writing, then if you're asked questions about it, you're not going to be able to explain yourself. And you might also look a little silly if you present the information in a way that is quite obvious to the reader, who in this case might be your professor, that you don't understand what it means. Instead, look for what you do understand. So as an example, as you read this article, you may go a little bit quicker through these results sections, but all of a sudden, once you get to the discussion section, so I briefly went through that in the first study. Here in the second study, we can look for that when it starts using information like here, a general discussion of what was significant, what wasn't. Let me try to find, maybe I should have had an example here for you, but basically this is an area that's going to tell you in more layman terms, if you will, in more common terms, of what was discovered in the study. And then in this discussion, sometimes you'll have a conclusion section that might be rather brief to highlight some of the main points. But as we see here in the discussion section, it went to the end, and now there's an appendix here that just shows, like in this example, what measure was used. All right, so in summary, when looking at, in this particular case, let's say you are new to graduate school, you're conducting a literature review forgive me here, I'm just going to scroll back to the beginning of this article kind of slowly here. You have all this information, and you might be a little bit overwhelmed what's important for your study. So in this case, because it's a literature review, we want to go through, read the beginning, get a general understanding of the topic, and then jump right into the research methods to learn how the study was conducted, who it was studied on, who was conducted on, and what maybe measures were used. And then fast forward to the discussion section where you can look at the results and find out what was discovered and what information was important in that discovery. If, in summary again, if you were maybe in a research methods or a statistics class, all of a sudden that other section where it says research methods or results, where it gives that statistical results, those become more important to you. So that's all I have. I hope this helped you understand how to identify certain article types, what to look for, and then when reading the article, what sections become more important to you depending on your goals. This is Dr. Dan. Thank you very much for your time.